Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was chosen to lead the Justice League in Crisis on Infinite Earths. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air and ground gamma tasted of ozone and pulverized concrete. A symphony of destruction, conducted for the sake of education, echoed between the skeletal remains of mock skyscrapers and mangled industrial piping. For the students of UA High's Class 1A, it was just another Tuesday. Izuku, Deku, Midoriya moved through the chaos like a living thunderclap. Green lightning, a manifestation of One for All's immense power, crackled around his form, tracing the lines of his upgraded costume. His movements were no longer the reckless, bone-shattering gambles of his first year. They were precise, controlled, and devastatingly effective. Uraraka-san, status on the West Quadrant evac point. He yelled into his comms, his voice steady despite the burn in his lungs. He had just finished clearing a 3-block radius of fallen debris, his boots barely touching the ground as he used a combination of float and controlled bursts from his legs to navigate the treacherous terrain. A slightly breathless but determined voice crackled back. Secure, Deku-kun! Ida-kun and Zero-kun have the perimeter locked down. We've moved all the rescue dummies to the designated safe zone. Roger. Izuku replied, landing softly atop a fractured water tower to survey the scene. Below him, the mock city was a whirlwind of coordinated action. Shoto Todoroki's ice ramps provided smooth, efficient pathways for rescue operations. Katsuki Bakugo's controlled explosions were not weapons of attack, but precision tools, blasting away impassable rubble without disturbing the delicate structures beneath. It was a beautiful, chaotic dance of heroism. Even in training, Izuku's mind was a whirlwind of analysis, a constant stream of muttering that had evolved from a nervous habit into a focused tactical tool. Bakugo's AP shot is becoming more refined, less concussive force, more piercing, good for urban rescue. Todoroki's flash freezing is faster, but the structural integrity of the ice is slightly compromised after 5 minutes of sustained use. Need to factor that into long-term evacuation plans. Kaminari's targeted discharge is perfect for powering down rogue systems, but his effective range is still. His thoughts were cut short by a fresh wave of tremors, simulated by power loader from the control room. A 6-story office building, already groaning under the strain of fictional damage, began to list dangerously. Main tower at Sector 3 is coming down! Kirishima's hardened voice shouted over the comms. It's gonna crush the designated shelter. Izuku didn't hesitate. One for All surged, a familiar inferno igniting in his core. He crouched, muscles coiling like overwound springs. The vestiges within him, a silent council he was still learning to understand, felt like a steady presence at his back. He was not just Izuku Midoriya anymore. He was the 9th. The weight of that legacy was a constant, crushing pressure, a motivator more potent than any fear. Ever since the war, since Shigaraki, since the world nearly ended, he'd felt that weight settle into his bones. It was a part of him now. Save everyone. It was a promise. A mandate. With a roar that tore through the din of the training ground, he launched himself into the air. Manchester Smash! His axe kick, amplified to an incredible degree, connected with the falling building's primary support column. The force didn't just strike, it radiated, a shockwave of pure power that atomized the concrete and steel. The building's fall was arrested, its momentum shattered, and it crumbled vertically upon itself, collapsing into a neat pile of rubble instead of pancaking the shelter below. He landed, his body screaming with the familiar ache of a high-output move. He was getting better at mitigating the damage, but 100% still took its toll. As the dust began to settle, he took a deep, shuddering breath. For a moment, he felt a flicker of satisfaction. This was progress. This was what it meant to be a symbol. And then, the world ended. It didn't happen with a bang or a tremor. It was a silent, creeping void. The sound of Bakugo yelling something triumphant in the distance was the first thing to go, stretched into an infinitely thin auditory thread, and then snipped out of existence. The color followed. The vibrant orange of explosions, the cool blue of ice, the green of his own power. All of it bled away into a clinical, sterile white. The rough texture of the ground beneath his feet became unnervingly smooth, then intangible. His danger sense, his sixth sense gifted by the fourth user, Haikid Shinomori, erupted. It wasn't the sharp, directional spike of an incoming attack. It was a full-body, high-frequency scream of absolute, existential dread. It was a warning that the very concept of direction and attack was ceasing to mean anything. His body, his thoughts, his very existence felt like it was being unwritten. He tried to scream, but he had no breath. He tried to move, but he had no limbs. There was only the blinding, all-consuming whiteness. A silent, featureless eternity. Izuku's return to consciousness was a violent gasp. He choked on air that tasted of static electricity and cold, sterile metal. He was on his back, staring up at a ceiling that wasn't a ceiling. It was a swirling tapestry of impossible colors, cosmic dust, and nebulae he had only ever seen in textbooks. Galaxies drifted lazily past like luminous jellyfish in an endless, dark ocean. Panic clawed at his throat. He shot up, his body thankfully whole and clad in his hero costume, though it was covered in a fine, shimmering dust. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The danger sense was still there, a low, persistent hum of wrongness that permeated everything. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff that wrapped around the entire world. He was on a circular platform of polished, obsidian-like material. Strange, crystalline structures rose from the floor like frozen trees, pulsing with a soft, internal light. The air was still, silent, and cold. He was alone. Where am I?" he whispered, his voice sounding small and fragile in the vast, silent chamber. "You are on my satellite," a voice boomed, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a voice that felt ancient, a voice that had the weight of mountains and the patience of geology. "A vessel outside the normal flow of space and time. A place of observation." Izuku scrambled to his feet, spinning around to find the source of the voice. A figure emerged from behind one of the crystal pillars. He was tall, impossibly so, clad in ornate blue and gold armor that seemed to be forged from starlight itself. His skin was a deep, cosmic blue, and his face was lined with the wisdom of eons. He radiated an aura of immense power, but it was a neutral, observational power, like a scientist studying an ant. This was the Monitor. Beside him stood a woman in a complex, hooded uniform of silver and blue. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked as though it had been etched there. She clutched a staff, her knuckles white. This was Harbinger, and she looked like she had just witnessed the death of a god. Deku, ever the empath, felt a wave of her despair wash over him, and he instinctively took a half-step back. Who are you?" Izuku stammered, his mind racing, trying to categorize the threat. A new villain? A quirk that warped reality? Was this an illusion? "I have many names. You may call me the Monitor," the cosmic being stated calmly. "And this is my herald Lila. We have brought you here because all of reality is in peril." Izuku's brain, trained to analyze and deconstruct, struggled to find purchase. All of reality? What does that mean? Is this about Shigaraki? The League of Villains? The Monitor's expression was one of immense, cosmic pity. "The threats you know are but a child's squabble compared to the storm that is upon us. The very fabric of existence is being unmade." He raised a hand, and the space in front of Izuku shimmered. An image resolved itself in the air, a planet. It looked like Earth, but the continents were subtly different. Izuku watched in horror as the sky above this alien yet familiar world turned a terrifying, blood red. Then, from the horizon, a wave of pure, shimmering white energy rolled in. It was not fire, not water, not anything he could comprehend. It was a wave of absolute nothingness. As it passed over the land, cities, mountains, and oceans were not destroyed. They were simply erased, leaving a blank, featureless void in their wake. A silent scream of a billion souls echoed in the psychic void, a faint tremor that made Izuku's teeth ache. "This is the antimatter wave," the Monitor explained, his voice grim. "It is consuming everything. Every Earth, in every universe." Izuku's world tilted on its axis. Every universe? The concept was so far beyond his understanding that he felt a wave of nausea. "Multiple universes? An infinite number," the Monitor confirmed. "A multiverse," And it is all dying. This wave is the weapon of a being of unimaginable power. My opposite. My shadow. The anti-monitor. He seeks to destroy every positive matter universe until only his own, the antimatter universe, remains. Izuku's legs felt weak. He leaned against one of the crystals for support, his mind reeling. The paranormal liberation war, all for one, Shigaraki, it had all felt like the end of the world. He was now being told it wasn't even the end of a single street in the grand, cosmic neighborhood that was being demolished. Why me? Izuku finally managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. I'm just a student. There are so many stronger heroes. All Might. Endeavor. Stars and Stripe, why bring me here? The monitor turned his full, ancient gaze upon Izuku. It felt like being weighed and measured by a god. I have scoured the infinite strands of reality, Izuku Midoriya. I have watched heroes rise and fall on a trillion worlds. Strength is not what this crisis requires. Not strength alone, the monitor stated. The anti-monitor is not a foe that can simply be punched into submission. To face him is to face oblivion itself. It requires more than power. It requires a specific, and exceedingly rare, form of leadership. He gestured again, and new images swirled in the air. Izuku saw himself, a younger, more terrified version, shattering his own arms to save Kuta from Muscular. He saw himself in the thick of the Shai Hasaikai raid, his body breaking apart under the strain of 100%, all to save a single little girl. He saw himself analyzing his classmates' quirks, not to defeat them, but to better coordinate with them. He saw himself offering his own power, the most sacred secret in his world, to his childhood rival in a moment of desperate need. I have observed your actions, the monitor continued. You possess a unique combination of faculties. Your analytical mind deconstructs a battle in moments, seeing synergies and strategies others would miss in the heat of combat. But it is not a cold logic. It is tempered, guided by a boundless and often reckless empathy. You do not calculate how to win, you calculate how to save everyone. And you possess a spirit of self-sacrifice that is nearly absolute. You will burn yourself down to the very atoms to serve as a shield for others. Izuku stared, dumbfounded. He had always seen those traits as a mix of nerdy habit, emotional weakness, and reckless stupidity. He was constantly being told to be more careful, to value himself more. To hear them presented as the linchpin for saving all of reality was incomprehensible. This crisis will bring together the greatest champions from the remaining universes, the monitor declared, his voice resonating with finality. They will be powerful. They will be proud. And they will be broken, having watched their own worlds die. They will not listen to a god telling them what to do. They need a leader who can understand their pain, who can forge their despair into a weapon, and who can see the path forward when all they see is darkness. They need a symbol. Not of power, but of hope. The monitor took a step forward, his shadow falling over the trembling boy. Izuku Midoriya of Earth 789. He said, naming Izuku's home reality with casual omniscience. I have not chosen you to be the strongest soldier in this war. I have chosen you to be its heart. I have chosen you to lead the Justice League. The name meant nothing to Izuku, but the weight of the word, lead, was enough to make him physically recoil. No! The word burst out of him, sharp with panic. No, you can't, I can't. I'm not a leader. I'm just... I follow orders. I'm not a commander, I'm Deku. I'm the useless one. I can't even lead my own class without Ida-kun's help. You've made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. He was hyperventilating now, the old, familiar panic of his quirkless childhood roaring back to the surface. He was a fraud. A pretender. He was just a kid who had been given a borrowed power he still barely understood. And now this cosmic being was asking him to lead legends? Before the monitor could respond, the air in the chamber crackled with energy. A bolt of golden lightning struck the floor with a deafening crack, resolving into a man in a sleek, crimson suit with a lightning bolt emblem on his chest. He was vibrating slightly, his eyes wide and scanning the room at 1,000 frames per second. Okay, that was new. The Flash, Barry Allen of Earth 1, said, his voice a rapid staccato. A moment later, a section of the room plunged into absolute darkness. From the deepest part of the shadow, a figure emerged as if he were born of it. He was clad in armor the color of midnight, a long, scalloped cape hanging from his broad shoulders. A cowl with pointed ears obscured his face, leaving only a grim, determined jaw visible. His presence was a void of sound and light, a pocket of cold, calculated intensity. Batman of Earth 1 had arrived. Then came a shimmer of divine light, coalescing into a woman of breathtaking power and grace. She wore armor of red, blue, and gold, with a golden lasso at her hip and bracelets on her wrists that hummed with ancient magic. Her bearing was that of a warrior princess, her eyes holding both compassion and a fire that had seen 1,000 years of battle. Wonder Woman, Diana of Themyscira, surveyed the scene with a warrior's appraisal. A brilliant flash of red and blue light followed, and a woman with golden hair and a costume bearing a familiar sigil appeared, hovering a few inches off the ground. She looked young, confused, and worried, her eyes darting around the alien environment. This was Supergirl, from her own Earth, plucked from a world already lost. Finally, with a sound like a gentle thunderclap, the last hero arrived. He landed with a soft thud, his red cape settling around him. He was the very picture of strength and dignity, his broad chest emblazoned with a shield, the symbol of the House of El. But it was his face that held the most power. It was kind, his jaw set not with aggression, but with a profound sense of responsibility. Superman of Earth 1 looked at the monitor, his expression one of deep concern, not fear. Izuku's mind, even in its state of absolute panic, went into overdrive. The hero Fanba in him screamed. He was seeing heroes, pro-heroes, unlike any he had ever imagined. Their costumes, their demeanors, the sheer aura of power they exuded, it was on a completely different level. He could feel the raw kinetic energy humming off the man in red, the palpable intelligence and menace radiating from the man in black, the ancient, divine power from the warrior woman, and the literal, sun-like power coming from the two in the blue and red. His analytical brain started a frantic, involuntary catalog. Man in red suit appears to have superspeed, kinetic energy discharge is visible, potential for infinite mass punch? The Dark One, no discernible powers, but his situational awareness is off the charts. He's already mapped the room, identified threats, and formulated 3 escape plans. The woman with the lasso, she feels ancient, divine, like a goddess of war given mortal form, and the other 2, their power feels similar. Kryptonian? Like Stars and Stripes' description of her mentor, but purer. Stronger. This one, the man, he feels like All Might. No. He felt stronger than All Might. The thought was blasphemy, but it was true. He felt like the sun. A calm, steady, unyielding source of incredible power. The heroes, disoriented but not panicked, turned their attention to the monitor. Monitor! Superman's voice was a calm, commanding baritone. What is this? Lila sent a distress call. She said worlds were dying. They are, Kal-El. The monitor replied grimly. All of them. The crisis is upon us. He gave them the same, terrifying explanation he had given Izuku, showing them the visions of the antimatter wave, of the dying universes. These heroes, however, did not crumble. They listened with grim resolve, their expressions hardening. They had faced cosmic threats before. This was larger, more final, but the nature of the fight was familiar. Wonder Woman stepped forward. Then we will fight. As we always have. Tell us what must be done. A murmur of agreement went through the others. This was their element. An impossible threat, a desperate battle. This was the Justice League. The monitor looked at the assembled heroes, the greatest champions of their respective Earths. Then, he turned his gaze back to the terrified, trembling boy in the green hero costume standing awkwardly to the side. Your courage is not in doubt, Princess Diana, the monitor said, his voice echoing in the silent chamber. But courage alone will not suffice. This war must be waged on a strategic level beyond any you have ever fought. It requires a leader chosen not for their power, but for their unique perspective. He raised a hand and gestured toward Izuku. Behold! This is Izuku Midoriya. I have brought him here to be your field commander for the battle to save what remains of the multiverse. Silence. It was a profound, deafening silence, thick with disbelief. The 6 legendary heroes turned as one to look at the boy. Izuku felt 1,000,000 tons of scrutiny press down on him, grinding him into dust. He wanted to use float to escape, to use full cowling to run, to use smokescreen to disappear. He did none of them. He was frozen solid. Barry Allen was the first to break the silence, a nervous energy thrumming through him. No offense, big guy, but he's a kid. Like a high school kid. Supergirl floated closer, her head tilted. You can't be serious. We're facing the end of everything, and you want us to take orders from a teenager? Her voice was sharp, laced with the fresh grief of a world she had just lost. Superman held up a hand, his expression diplomatic but clearly troubled. He addressed the monitor, not Izuku, a subtle but clear sign of where he believed the chain of command should lie. Monitor, we trust your judgment has its reasons, but perhaps you could elaborate. What experience does this boy have that we do not? Wonder Woman's skepticism was colder, more direct. Her warrior's pride was stung. We are warriors, Monitor. We have fought gods and monsters. We do not follow children into battle. She looked at Izuku, and her gaze was not unkind, but it was dismissive. She saw a scared boy, not a general. But it was Batman's reaction that was the most devastating. He had remained silent, his white lenses fixed on Izuku, analyzing him with an intensity that felt like a physical violation. He took 3 slow, deliberate steps forward, his cape remaining perfectly still behind him. The ambient light of the chamber seemed to bend around him, swallowed by the darkness of his suit. He stopped directly in front of Izuku, close enough that Izuku could see the stubble on his chin. Izuku felt his breath catch in his chest. He was face to face with the embodiment of intimidation. The air grew cold. I have analyzed him. Batman's voice was a low, gravelly growl. It was not loud, but it cut through the chamber and silenced everyone. Heart rate is elevated to 180 beats per minute. Respiration is shallow and erratic. Pupils are dilated. His posture indicates a severe fight-or-flight response, but he's frozen. He's terrified. He didn't look away from Izuku, but his next words were for the monitor. You have not chosen a leader. You have chosen a liability. You've brought a frightened child to a war of gods. He then looked down, his gaze falling upon Izuku's trembling hands, which were clenched and unclenched at his sides. Whatever your cosmic calculations told you, Batman continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing. You are wrong. He is not ready. Look at him. He is broken before the first shot has even been fired. He will get people killed. Every word was a perfectly aimed blow, striking at the core of every doubt Izuku had ever had about himself. He was a fraud. He was weak. He was a scared kid playing dress-up. He wasn't a hero. He was just Deku. He opened his mouth to say something, to protest, to defend himself, to agree with them, anything, but all that came out was a pathetic, choked squeak. Tears welled in his eyes, hot with shame and terror. He looked from Batman's unforgiving cowl to Superman's concerned frown, to Wonder Woman's regal disappointment. These were the legends he was supposed to lead. They were titans. Gods among mortals. And they saw him for exactly what he was, an imposter. The weight of infinite dying worlds, the gaze of legendary heroes, and the crushing force of his own inadequacy crashed down upon him all at once. Izuku Midoriya, the boy who would save everyone, stood on the precipice of oblivion and felt utterly, hopelessly, and completely alone. The silence that followed the monitor's declaration was a living thing, a crushing weight that pressed down on Izuku Midoriya's shoulders. Batman's final words, "He will get people killed," echoed in the vast, sterile chamber, each syllable a hammer blow against his already fractured confidence. The legendary heroes before him were a pantheon of gods, and he was a heretic they were about to cast out. He could feel their collective judgment, a mixture of pity, frustration, and cold dismissal. His own body had betrayed him, displaying his terror for the galaxy's greatest detective to dissect and discard. He wanted the floor to swallow him. He wanted to be back at Ground Gamma, covered in dust and sweat, his greatest worry being a lecture from Aizawa-sensei. There is no time for debate. The monitor's voice cut through the tension, as implacable as a glacier. It was not a voice that offered comfort, only facts. The wave is approaching Earth 38. Its resonant frequency is beginning to decay. It will be annihilated in less than 1 standard hour. An image flared to life in the air between them. It was another Earth, this one with a slightly different geography. Izuku's analytical mind, accursed and blessed thing, couldn't help but notice the details even through his panic. The architecture in the sprawling city below was streamlined, almost Art Deco, with gleaming silver towers and sky bridges trafficked by strangely rounded, hovering vehicles. It was a world both familiar and alien, but the sky was a terrifying, blood-red canvas, a celestial wound bleeding across the heavens. Its primary metropolis is in a state of chaos. The monitor continued, his tone unchanging. The population is 300 million. The local heroes fell within the first 5 minutes. The vanguard of the Anti-Monitor's army has already made planet fall. Superman's gaze snapped from Izuku to the image, his jaw tightening. The kindness in his eyes was instantly replaced by a steely resolve that reminded Izuku so intensely of All Might it made his heart ache. The vanguard? Shadow demons? Harbinger spoke for the first time, her voice a strained, haunted whisper. She flinched as if remembering something horrific. Creatures of pure antimatter. They are legion. They exist only to terrorize and destroy, to sow fear and despair before the end comes. Then our course is clear, Wonder Woman stated, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of her sword, which seemed to appear from nowhere at her hip. We evacuate who we can. We fight what we must. Agreed, Superman said, turning to the others. He was taking command, naturally and effortlessly. The others looked to him, a silent consensus passing between them. He was their leader. Of course he was. The Monitor had made a terrible mistake. Flash, Supergirl, you're with me on search and rescue. Your speed will be critical. We'll triage the most densely populated areas first. Wonder Woman, you'll be on the ground, crowd control and defense. Keep the evacuation points clear of whatever these things are. Batman. He glanced at the Dark Knight. I'll find a communications hub. Batman growled, already 1 step ahead. Override their emergency broadcast system. Coordinate a citywide evacuation route. And get a tactical overview of the enemy. It was a solid plan, devised in seconds. Efficient. Logical. It completely bypassed Izuku, leaving him standing uselessly at the side. He felt a strange, twisted sense of relief mixed with profound shame. They didn't need him. He could just stay out of the way. Your plan is sound, Kal-El, the Monitor said, but incomplete. You are thinking as individuals. You must learn to think as a single weapon. That is why he is coming with you. The cosmic being's gaze fell once more upon Izuku. A cold dread washed over him. Me? He squeaked. Batman let out a short, humorless sound that might have been a scoff. He'll be a liability. He's not trained for this. His training is precisely why he is necessary. The Monitor countered, his patience finally showing the barest hint of a crack. You are all accustomed to being the strongest person in the room. You solve problems by applying overwhelming force. It has always been enough. Today, it will not be. Now go. Lila will transport you. Before anyone could protest further, Harbinger raised her staff. A blinding column of silver energy erupted from the floor, engulfing them all. Izuku felt the sensation of being pulled apart and reassembled at the atomic level, a nauseating lurch that twisted his insides. The sterile silence of the satellite was replaced by a wall of terrifying sound, screams, sirens, the wet, tearing sound of something inhuman. The dissonant chorus of a world dying. They materialized in the center of what must have been a grand plaza. Ornate fountains were shattered, their waters running red. Elegant skycars were piled in flaming heaps, and everywhere, people were running. Their faces were masks of pure, unadulterated terror. The sky was worse up close. The angry crimson hue felt oppressive, suffocating, casting everything in a hellish light. On the horizon, visible between the gleaming, retrofuturistic skyscrapers, was the wave. It wasn't just a white line anymore. It was a shimmering, expanding wall of non-existence, silently devouring the edge of the world. It was moving faster than he expected. They didn't have an hour, not even close, and then he saw them. The shadow demons. They swarmed from the sky and crawled from the sewers, a chittering, writhing tide of darkness. They were vaguely humanoid, but their limbs were too long, their joints bending at unnatural angles. They had no faces, only smooth, featureless heads that seemed to absorb the light. Their bodies were not solid but composed of a shifting, roiling darkness, like solidified smoke. They moved with a twitching, insect-like speed, their long, sharp claws scything through the air. "By Hera!" Wonder Woman whispered, her eyes wide with grim understanding. The heroes didn't wait for an order. They exploded into action, a force of nature unleashed upon the chaos. Superman was a red and blue blur, catching a falling bus with one hand as if it were a child's toy, his heat vision lancing out to vaporize a trio of demons that were descending on a trapped family. Supergirl moved in perfect concert with him, a whirlwind of motion, pulling people from crushed vehicles and shielding them with her own invulnerable body. The Flash was everywhere at once. One moment he was a streak of lightning pulling a dozen people from a collapsing sky bridge, the next he was miles away, creating a vortex to snuff out a raging fire. He was saving people by the hundred every second, a one-man evacuation army. Wonder Woman was a demigod of war. She landed in the middle of the largest swarm, her bracelets deflecting blasts of antimatter energy the demons spat from their maws. Her sword was a silver arc of death, slicing through the smoky forms of the creatures, which dissolved with a sickening hiss. She was a beacon of defiance, rallying the terrified citizens behind her. "To me! This way! Stay behind me!" Her voice rang out, clear and powerful. Batman, true to his word, had vanished. Izuku knew, instinctively, that he was already several blocks away, a ghost moving through the carnage on his own silent mission. And Izuku was standing frozen in the middle of the plaza. The sheer scale of it was paralyzing. His danger sense wasn't just humming, it was a constant, deafening siren in his skull, screaming danger, danger, danger from every conceivable direction. The sights, the sounds, the smell of ozone and death. It was the Kamino Ward incident, the Shaiha Saikai raid, and the Paranormal Liberation War all rolled into one, amplified 1,000 times. He was drowning in it. He saw a shadow demon leap towards a small child who had fallen behind his parents. Izuku's body screamed to move, to activate One for All and intercept. But he hesitated. For a fraction of a second, Batman's voice echoed in his head. He will get people killed. What if he was too slow? What if his attack missed and hit the child? What if he wasn't strong enough? In that sliver of a moment of doubt, a golden lasso snaked out and wrapped around the creature, dissolving it into nothingness. Wonder Woman gave him a sharp, concerned look before turning her attention back to the fight. The look wasn't angry. It was worse. It was disappointed. She had seen him freeze. Shame burned in his gut, hot and acidic. He scrambled behind the wreck of a large truck, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was useless. A liability. He was just a scared kid, and he was completely and utterly out of his depth. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block it all out, but he couldn't block out the sound of his own muttering. It started as a low, terrified whisper, a nervous tick resurfacing under immense pressure. Too many, there's too many of them. Their movements are erratic but coordinated, like a hive mind. Superman's punches are strong, but the demons just reform. Blunt force trauma is ineffective against their semi-corporeal state. Wonder Woman's sword works, it seems to sever their connection to this dimension, but she's only one person. Flash is saving lives, but he's not reducing the number of threats. The problem isn't power, it's efficiency. The familiar rhythm of analysis began to cut through the panic. It was the one thing he could control, the one part of his brain that worked better under pressure. He peeked over the edge of the truck, his eyes no longer seeing just chaos, but data points. He watched Supergirl unleash a blast of heat vision. It was a precise, concentrated beam that drilled through a single shadow demon, causing it to evaporate. Effective, but slow. She was taking them out one by one, while 10 more swarmed in to take its place. He saw Wonder Woman cleave through 3 demons with a single swing, but then she was forced onto the defensive as a dozen more spat antimatter projectiles at her. She was a bulwark, but she was pinned. He watched Superman. The Man of Steel was a living battering ram. He flew through a swarm, and the demons scattered like smoke in a hurricane, only to coalesce again seconds later behind him. His incredible strength was like punching water. It displaced the threat, but it didn't eliminate it. Then his eyes fell on the Flash. Barry was moving so fast he was a continuous red line weaving through the city. And Izuku noticed something fascinating. Every time Barry made a sharp turn, there was a faint crack, a miniature sonic boom. The shadow demons nearest to that sound would flinch. They would writhe and momentarily lose cohesion, their dark forms flickering. The data points began to connect. Blunt force is ineffective. High-energy attacks like heat vision are effective but too targeted. The creatures are vulnerable to certain sonic frequencies. Their main strength is their numbers and their swarming tactics, so the key isn't to fight them one-on-one. The key is to break their swarm and hit them all at once. A plan began to form in his mind. It was a crazy, desperate gamble. It required perfect coordination from a team that saw him as less than nothing. To even suggest it felt like an act of supreme arrogance. But as he watched another building crumble, as he heard the screams of the dying, a different voice cut through his fear. It was the voice of All Might. "It's fine now." "Why?" "Because I am here." He wasn't All Might. But he was here. And doing nothing was the same as letting them die. He scrambled from behind the truck, his heart feeling like it was trying to beat its way out of his chest. He fumbled with the comm unit on his cowl, a piece of tech far more advanced than UA's. He prayed it was a universal channel. His first attempt to speak was a choked cough. He swallowed, took a breath that felt like breathing fire, and tried again. "Flash!" His voice cracked, a pathetic squeak over the comms. He could feel the judgment of the others, even through the radio's silence. A split second later, a voice buzzed back in his ear, breathless and rapid fire. "Kid? You okay? You should find cover. It's not safe out there." Barry's voice was kind, concerned, but also dismissive. The voice you use for a civilian you're trying to move along. "No! Listen! I need you to stop evacuating!" Izuku shouted, the words tumbling out of him in a rush. The silence on the comm channel was deafening. He could practically hear Batman's scowl. "What?" Barry's voice was incredulous. "Kid, there are thousands of people still trapped in the financial district. I can't just... You're treating the symptom, not the disease." Izuku interrupted, his voice gaining a sliver of conviction. He was in his element now, the world of quirks and powers and strategies. "We can't save anyone if we're overwhelmed. Your speed, the sonic booms you're making, they're disorienting the demons." He saw Wonder Woman dispatch another group of creatures before glancing up, her expression on the verge of telling him to be quiet. He pressed on before he lost his nerve. "I need you on offense. Go to Grand Central Avenue. It's a long, straight channel. I need you to run back and forth along its length, as fast as you can. Break the sound barrier over and over. Create a sonic cage. Trap them in the vibrations." "A sonic cage?" Barry sounded intrigued, the scientist in him piqued. "The resonance might disrupt their molecular structure, but the energy required would be... Just do it! Please!" Izuku begged. There was a pause. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought Barry would refuse. Then, the voice came back, a hint of grudging respect in its tone. "It's a crazy plan. I'll give you that. On my way." A red streak peeled away from the evacuation zone and shot towards the coordinates Izuku had indicated. One down. His heart hammered. Now for the others. "Superman! Supergirl!" he yelled, forcing himself to sound more confident than he felt. "Get airborne! Position yourselves directly above Grand Central Avenue. The Flash is going to herd the demons into a condensed group for you. Don't engage yet. Just get into position and charge your heat vision to maximum. Wait for my signal." "And why should we listen to you, child?" came Wonder Woman's stern voice. She was holding a line near the avenue, single-handedly preventing a swarm from overrunning a makeshift triage center. "He's right." A low growl cut through the comms. "Batman. The creatures are reforming after physical impact. A wide area, High-energy attack is our most logical option. His strategy is sound. Do it. Izuku felt a jolt of shock. Batman agreed with him? There was a moment's hesitation, then Superman's voice, calm and decisive. You heard him. Kara with me. Two bright streaks shot into the sky, positioning themselves like avenging angels above the canyon of skyscrapers. The plan was in motion. Izuku's mind was racing, calculating angles, power outputs, potential flaws. The demons were drawn to sound and motion, to the chaos of the fight. The Flash's sonic assault would be an irresistible lure. As if on cue, a series of thunderous cracks echoed from the avenue. Barry was at work. From his vantage point, Izuku could see the swarms of shadow demons reacting. They peeled away from their other targets, their faceless heads turning towards the source of the painful, disorienting noise. They poured into Grand Central Avenue like a river of black ink, drawn towards the frantic, flickering light of the Flash. It's working! Izuku breathed. They're taking the bait, but there was a problem. A large number of the demons were airborne. They flew above the sonic waves, unaffected, and began to dive bomb the Flash. They're flying over the cage. Flash is exposed, he yelled. Batman! Wonder Woman! I need a net. A net? Diana's voice was strained. She was being pushed back. Batman, your grapnel lines! They have high tensile strength. Can you create a web across the top of the avenue, between the buildings? Ground the flyers. Tangle their wings. Funnel them down to Wonder Woman's position at the mouth of the street, already on it. Batman's voice was clipped. He must have anticipated it. A series of sharp thwips echoed through the buildings. High-strength cables, almost invisible against the red sky, crisscrossed the top of the avenue. The flying demons, clumsy and single-minded, flew right into them, becoming entangled and falling to the street below. Wonder Woman! The mouth of the avenue! That's your choke point. Don't let a single one get out. Hold the line, with pleasure! She roared. She took up a position at the street's entrance, a lone warrior against the tide of darkness. The falling, tangled demons became easy prey for her sword and lasso. She was no longer just a defender, she was an executioner. The entire street was now a kill box. A perfectly designed, multi-layered trap. The Flash's sonic booms kept the swarm disoriented and contained. Batman's web neutralized their air superiority. Wonder Woman plugged the only exit. The demons were packed in shoulder to shoulder, a writhing mass of helpless antimatter. Izuku felt a surge of adrenaline, a strange, terrifying clarity. This was it. Superman! Supergirl! Now! He screamed, his voice raw. Unleash everything you've got. Full width beam. Scorch the entire avenue. From the heavens 2 suns were born. 2 immense, white-hot beams of energy descended from the sky. They weren't the precise, cutting lasers from before. They were wide, all-consuming cones of stellar fire. They struck the street and erupted, turning the asphalt to glass and the air to plasma. The shadow demons didn't even have time to hiss. The moment the heat vision touched them, they were not burned, but annihilated. The concentrated positive energy of 2 Kryptonians at full blast was the conceptual opposite of their existence. For a full 10 seconds, Grand Central Avenue was transformed into a corridor of holy fire. The collective shriek of tens of thousands of shadow demons being unmade was a sound Izuku would never forget. When the beams finally subsided, the street was silent. It was scarred, melted, and glowing cherry red, but it was empty. The swarm that had threatened to overwhelm the entire city was gone. In the sudden, ringing silence, the heroes stood, breathing heavily. They had just wiped out a significant portion of the invading army in a single, coordinated strike. Holy! Barry's voice came over the comms, filled with awe. Kid, that actually worked. Before anyone else could comment, Harbinger's voice cut in, strained and urgent. The wave is accelerating. You must return now. The Earth is lost. The words were a bucket of ice water. They hadn't saved the planet. They had only bought a few minutes for a few thousand people. As if on cue, the ground began to tremble violently. The white wall of nothingness on the horizon was now terrifyingly close, consuming the city's edge. The end had come. A column of silver light engulfed them, and the screams of Earth-38 were silenced forever. They reappeared on the monitor's satellite, the transition just as jarring as before. The silence of the cosmic vessel was a stark contrast to the apocalyptic chaos they had just left. Supergirl let out a small, choked sob, turning away from the others. She had just watched another Earth die, a fresh wound on top of the one that had taken her own home. Superman placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his own face a mask of grief. Izuku's legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, the adrenaline draining away, leaving him trembling and nauseous. He had just orchestrated the deaths of thousands of enemy combatants, but he had failed the ultimate mission. The planet, and everyone they had left behind, was gone. The weight of that failure was immense. He had expected shouts, accusations. He had frozen in combat. He had pulled the fastest man alive off evacuation duty. He had gambled with billions of lives. Instead, there was only a heavy silence. He felt a presence beside him and looked up. The Flash was standing there, his cowl off, revealing a man with kind eyes and a weary but appreciative expression. Barry Allen offered him a small, tired nod. It wasn't praise. It was acknowledgement. A gesture that said, "I see what you did. I understand." Wonder Woman approached, her warrior's pride now mixed with a grudging respect. "Your strategy was unorthodox," she said, her voice formal but no longer dismissive. "But it was effective. You saved many lives that would have otherwise been lost to that swarm. You have a keen mind for battle, young man." Superman looked over, his gaze lingering on Izuku. The open skepticism was gone, replaced by a thoughtful, reassessing curiosity. He seemed to be looking at Izuku for the first time, seeing not just a scared child, but the mind that had forged them into a weapon. Then Izuku's eyes met the white lenses of Batman's cowl. The Dark Knight stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He hadn't moved. He just watched, his intense, analytical gaze boring into Izuku. The silence stretched, and Izuku felt his stomach clench. He expected the final, cutting remark, the "I told you so," the confirmation that his momentary success was a fluke. Batman said nothing. He simply turned and walked towards a console at the edge of the chamber, his cape sweeping behind him. He said nothing at all. And that silence, coming from him, was louder and more meaningful than any praise. It was the silence of a man reevaluating his data, of a theory being disproven. It was the silence of a first, infinitesimal seed of trust being planted in the most barren and unforgiving soil imaginable. Izuku Midoriya was still terrified. He was still overwhelmed. He still felt like an imposter. But as he looked at the heroes around him, he felt a tiny, fragile spark ignite in his chest. It wasn't confidence. It wasn't pride. It was the simple, terrifying realization that, against all odds, they had listened. And it had worked. The trial by fire was over, and somehow, he had survived. The journey back to the Monitor's satellite was a silent one, heavy with the ghosts of 300 million souls. The victory on Earth-38 felt like ashes in Izuku's mouth. His plan had worked, a stunning and terrifying realization, but it had only been a single, bloody paragraph in the final chapter of a world's history. They had saved a handful of lifeboats from a sinking continental ship. The assembled heroes dealt with the hollow aftermath in their own ways. Supergirl had retreated to a secluded corner of the crystalline chamber, her knees drawn to her chest, a solitary figure wrapped in the red cape that was a symbol of a house, a family, and a world that no longer existed for her. Superman watched her from a distance, his own grief a palpable aura, tempered by the immense burden of being the unwavering pillar everyone else leaned on. Wonder Woman stood ramrod straight, staring into the swirling nebulae of the star ceiling, her expression that of a soldier memorizing the faces of the fallen. The Flash vibrated with nervous energy, pacing a tight circle, the kinetic energy of a man who needed to be moving, to be doing something, but had nowhere to run. Batman was a statue of shadow, already plugged into a monitor-provided console, absorbing data with a terrifying intensity, his way of processing trauma being to prepare for the next, inevitable wave of it. Izuku felt like an outsider, a child who had stumbled into a wake for a family he didn't know. He had given the orders. Did that make him responsible? His mind replayed the battle, every decision, every shouted command. Could I have been faster? Could a different strategy have saved the planet itself? If I had diverted Flash to create a planetary-scale vortex to slow the wave's approach, would it have bought more time? No, the energy expenditure would have killed him, and the wave is a fundamental force, not a physical one. His analytical mind was a curse, forcing him to perform an autopsy on a failure of cosmic proportions. He was so lost in the grim mathematics of his own perceived inadequacy that he barely registered the shift in the chamber's atmosphere. It began with a flicker in the air, a distortion like heat haze. Lila, the harbinger, appeared in the center of the platform. She was leaning heavily on her staff, her breathing ragged. The silver of her uniform seemed duller, tarnished by the horrors she had witnessed. Her eyes, already wide with terror, now seemed to hold the reflection of 1,000 dying suns. They are falling too fast," she gasped, her voice thin and brittle. "So many Earths, gone in an instant." Before anyone could respond, she raised her staff and slammed its base against the floor. It was not a grand or powerful gesture, but one of desperation. A portal of blinding light ripped open behind her, and from it spilled a torrent of new arrivals. It was not an orderly teleportation. It was a chaotic, last-ditch rescue. A man in a silver helmet shaped like a shallow bowl, adorned with wings at the ears, was the first to stumble through. He wore a simple red shirt with a yellow lightning bolt, and though his face was lined with age and his hair was gray at the temples, he moved with a vigor that defied his years. He caught himself, his eyes, wise and weary, taking in the impossible scene. This was Jay Garrick, the Flash of Earth 2. Right behind him came a woman of astonishing power, her short blonde hair framing a face set in a defiant scowl. Her white, red, and blue costume was similar to Superman's, but the iconic S-shield was stylized differently, sitting on her chest with an air of bold confidence. This was Power Girl, Kara Zor-El of Earth 2, a Kryptonian who radiated a slightly more volatile and ferocious energy than her Earth 1 counterparts. She landed, and the floor seemed to groan under the sheer density of her being. Then came a team. A young man in a domino mask and a colorful costume of red, green, and yellow, his movements sharp and acrobatic even in his disorientation. Robin. A tall, beautiful alien woman with orange skin and startling green eyes, clad in purple armor, who looked around with a mixture of confusion and fear. Starfire. A young man whose body was a patchwork of human flesh and gleaming chrome, a red, cybernetic eye glowing with a soft light as it scanned the environment. Cyborg. A hulking, green-skinned boy who could seemingly shift his form, his features momentarily twisting into those of a panicked green bear before settling back into a humanoid shape. Beast Boy. And finally, a young woman wrapped in a dark blue cloak, her face half hidden in shadow, who seemed to pull the very light from the air around her. An aura of immense, barely contained darkness and sorrow radiated from her, and Izuku's danger sense gave a low, mournful thrum in her presence. Raven. The original Teen Titans had arrived, and they looked like they had been pulled straight from a losing battle. "What is this? Where are we?" Robin demanded, his voice sharp, instinctively stepping in front of his team. His eyes immediately found Batman, and for a split second, a complex storm of emotions, shock, relief, resentment, flashed across the visible part of his face. "The end of the world, son," Jay Garrick answered grimly, his voice raspy. He looked at Barry Allen, and a flicker of recognition passed between the two speedsters from different realities. Or worlds, it would seem. The satellite, once feeling vast and empty, was now crowded. More heroes arrived in smaller flashes of light. A stoic man in green with a powerful-looking ring on his finger, an Atlantean prince clutching a trident, a winged hero from a world of anthropomorphic animals. Each brought with them the same haunted, shell-shocked expression. They were the last survivors of dead universes. The atmosphere on the satellite curdled. It was no longer a war room. It was a refugee camp for the impossibly powerful and the profoundly broken. The air grew thick with a collective, unspoken grief that was suffocating. A green lantern from an Earth where his core had been wiped out stared blankly at his ring, which flickered and died, its connection to a central power battery that no longer existed now severed. An Amazon warrior from a world without a Themyscira wept silently, clutching a shield bearing the faded crest of her fallen queen. Hope was not a currency here. It was a foreign concept. They were an army of ghosts, waiting for the void to claim them as it had everything they had ever known or loved. The heroes of Earth 1, who had at least been given a sliver of context by the monitor, found themselves surrounded by dozens of newcomers who were drowning in confusion and despair. Tensions began to fray. Power Girl, seeing Supergirl, strode over, her expression a mix of anguish and disbelief. You wear the shield of the House of L, she said, her voice rough with emotion. My cousin, on my world, he... She trailed off, unable to finish. Supergirl looked up, her own grief-stricken face mirroring Power Girl's. He fought until the end, she whispered. Two women, nearly identical yet from different realities, sharing a moment of impossible loss. Izuku watched all of this, feeling smaller and more insignificant than ever. His brief, fleeting moment of tactical success meant nothing here. These weren't soldiers to be commanded. They were survivors in desperate need of something he felt utterly unqualified to give. What could a teenage boy from a world of quirks possibly say to a man who had outrun the death of his own reality? He saw Jay Garrick standing alone, looking at his winged helmet, which he held in his hands. He turned it over and over, his thumb tracing the familiar curves as if it were a holy relic. In that simple, repetitive motion, Izuku saw a universe of pain. He was seeing not just a helmet, but a symbol, a legacy, a team, the Justice Society. That was now just a memory. Izuku's own legacy, the fiery, spectral power of One for All, pulsed within him. He felt the silent presence of the vestiges, the 8 souls entwined with his own. He knew what it was like to carry the weight of others. Taking a deep, trembling breath, he walked over to the old speedster. His approach was hesitant, his boots making almost no sound on the strange floor. Jay looked up, his eyes kind but filled with a sorrow so deep it seemed bottomless. Sorry, Izuku stammered, feeling foolish. That helmet. It looks important, Jay offered a sad smile. It is, son. It belonged to my father. Fought in the Great War with it. To me, it's a symbol of a promise. A promise to be a hero, for my city, for my world. His voice cracked. A world that's gone. Izuku looked down at his own gloved hands. He thought of All Might's emaciated form, of the promise he'd made to him. He thought of Nana Shimura's smile, of the torch passed down through generations. I think I understand, Izuku said softly, his voice barely a whisper. My power, it isn't my own. It was given to me. It's been passed down through 8 other people before me. Sometimes, when I use it, I can feel them. Their hopes, their regrets, their promise. He looked Jay in the eye, his own gaze earnest and filled with a shared understanding. It's like carrying a piece of their souls. It's heavy, isn't it? Jay Garrick stared at the boy, his weary expression softening into one of surprise, and then, profound empathy. He had expected a platitude, a comforting lie. Instead, he got the raw, unvarnished truth from the most unexpected of sources. This boy, this child from another universe, understood the weight of a legacy. Yes, son, Jay said, his voice thick with emotion. It is. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, a silent gesture of camaraderie that transcended worlds and generations. From across the room, Superman watched the exchange, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Izuku, emboldened by the small connection, realized this was the only thing he could do. He couldn't offer them victory. He couldn't bring back their worlds. But he could listen. He could understand. He could be the one person who saw them not as weapons in a cosmic war, but as people who were hurting. His next mission wasn't tactical, it was emotional. He sought out Raven, who was huddled in the deepest shadow she could find, her body trembling as she tried to shield herself from the overwhelming tide of despair in the room. He didn't say anything. He simply found a spare ration pack, a nutrient-dense, flavorless bar, and placed it gently on the floor beside her before moving away, giving her the space she clearly needed. It was a small, simple gesture of care, an acknowledgement of her existence that asked for nothing in return. He found his footing. This he knew how to do. This was just like comforting Eri after a nightmare, or helping Todoroki open up about his past. This was his other superpower. His tour of empathy, however, was interrupted by a new imperative. He knew that if they were to have any chance, any hope at all, he needed to understand the tools at his disposal. He approached the monitor, who was observing the chaotic scene with his usual unnerving detachment. "Monitor-san," Izuku said, his voice still quiet but now tinged with a newfound purpose. I need information. Files. On everyone here. Their powers, their histories, their psychological profiles if you have them. Everything." The monitor turned his ancient gaze upon him. For a moment, Izuku thought he would be refused. Then, the cosmic being gave a slow, deliberate nod. "A wise request. The data is available." He gestured to an unused console. Izuku practically ran to it. As the holographic displays flickered to life, showing him text in a language he shouldn't have been able to read but somehow understood, he felt a familiar surge. This was his comfort zone. This was his sanctuary. He pulled a fresh, miraculously undamaged notebook and pen from one of his utility pouches, a force of habit he would never break, and began to work. He became a whirlwind of focused energy. The low, crackling hum of One for All's green lightning began to envelop him, a subconscious manifestation of his brain working at maximum capacity. His muttering, once a sign of anxiety, was now the sound of the multiverse's most powerful supercomputer processing its last, best hope. He didn't just read the files, he inhaled them. He cross-referenced powers, analyzed team dynamics from different Earths, and searched for synergies no one else would think to look for. His pen flew across the pages, his messy scrawl filling diagram after diagram. Hero profile, Wonder Woman, Diana of Themyscira, Earth 1. Power source, divine, gifted by Olympian gods. Abilities, superhuman strength, class uncertain, potentially limitless, speed, durability, flight. Magical weaponry, lasso of Hestia compels truth, bracelets of submission deflect energy. Combat style, master of armed and unarmed combat, thousands of years of experience. Psychological note, warrior's pride, deep compassion but can be ruthless when necessary. A moral anchor, but can be stubborn. Potential synergy with Green Lantern, John Stewart? Her divine weapons might be able to cut through hard light constructs, creating unexpected attack vectors. Hero profile, The Flash, Jay Garrick, Earth 2. Power source, inhaled hard water vapors? Connected to a metaphysical speed force. Note, this speed force seems to be a multiversal constant, requires further study. Top speed, slower than Barry Allen, but possesses decades more experience and guile. Can steal kinetic energy. Psychological note, patriarchal figure. Strong moral center, carries the weight of his lost team, the JSA. Highly susceptible to morale drops related to legacy. Pair with younger, optimistic heroes to bolster his spirits. Beast Boy? Starfire? He saw more than just power sets. He saw the people behind them. He saw Cyborg's fear of losing his remaining humanity, and noted his technical genius could be key to interfacing with the Monitor's systems. He saw Starfire's emotional state directly affecting her energy projection, and realized she would be a liability if her morale broke. He saw Robin's fears, protective loyalty to his team and his complex relationship with Batman, identifying him as a potential sub-commander who could lead a squad with ruthless efficiency. And then he got to Batman. The file was surprisingly sparse, as if the Dark Knight himself had redacted it from reality. But it was enough. Hero profile, Batman, Bruce Wayne, Earth 1. Power source, none. Abilities, peak human physical and mental condition. Master strategist, detective, and martial artist. Extensive arsenal of non-lethal technology. Psychological note, core motivation is childhood trauma, murder of parents. Operates on a foundation of control, preparation, and intimidation. Deep-seated trust issues. Emotionally closed off. He is not a soldier. He is a general who fights on the front lines. To lead him, one does not give orders. One presents a logical plan that he cannot refute. He respects competence above all else. His greatest strength and greatest weakness are the same. He will do whatever it takes to win. Izuku paused, his pen hovering over the page. He looked over at the real Batman, who was still silently working at his own console. For the first time, he didn't see a terrifying monster or an unstoppable force. He saw a man who had turned his own unimaginable pain into a shield to protect the world. He saw a hero, a sad, lonely, terrifying hero. He understood. Hours passed. The initial chaos on the satellite subsided into a quiet, simmering despair. Izuku filled one notebook, then started on another. He was so engrossed in his work, so lost in the intricate dance of powers and personalities, that he didn't notice the colossal figure approaching him until a shadow fell over his pages. He looked up with a start. Superman was standing there, his arms crossed over the massive shield on his chest. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a profound weariness that seemed to dim the very air around him. Izuku's heart leaped into his throat. He thought he was about to be reprimanded, to be told to stop his pointless scribbling. "You haven't stopped since we got back," Superman said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. Sorry. I thought if I could understand everyone's abilities I could." Izuku stammered, his cheeks flushing. Superman's gaze fell upon the notebooks, the pages filled with complex charts, power-scaling graphs, and detailed psychological notes. He saw his own entry, a detailed analysis that was both clinically accurate and surprisingly insightful. He looked back at the boy, who now looked small and exhausted, the green lightning around him having faded to a faint, tired flicker. "The monitor called you a symbol of hope," Superman said, his voice laced with a deep, cosmic melancholy. He looked up at the starscape above them. "This S on my world, it's the symbol of my family, the House of El. It's meant to mean hope," he sighed, a sound like the shifting of tectonic plates. "But today I watched billions die. I listened to their final prayers as their world was erased. I feel their ghosts, and I have to stand here and pretend to be the rock, the man who never falters. How can I be a symbol of hope when I'm not sure I feel any myself?" It was a confession of stunning vulnerability. The strongest man Izuku had ever seen, a being who felt like a living star, was admitting to the darkness encroaching on his own heart. It was a cry for help, disguised as a philosophical question. Izuku looked at the Man of Steel, and all his fear, all his hero worship, melted away. He saw Clark Kent. He saw a good man tasked with an impossible burden, and Izuku knew, with absolute certainty, what he had to say. "When I was a kid," Izuku began, his voice quiet but steady, "I was told I couldn't be a hero. I didn't have a power. Everyone else did. I was useless. A Deku. He looked down at his scarred hands. "For a long time, I believed them. There was no logic, no reason for me to have any hope at all." He looked back up, meeting Superman's gaze directly. "But I still wanted to try. Even if I failed, even if I got hurt, the idea of not even trying was worse. The feeling of watching someone else get hurt, and knowing I did nothing, that was the only thing that truly scared me." He took a breath, the words flowing from the very core of his being now. "Hope, for me, it's not the belief that we're going to win. I look at that wave, and I don't know if we can stop it. I'm terrified we can't." His voice trembled for a moment, but he pressed on. "Hope isn't a feeling. It's a duty. It's the responsibility to get up and fight, especially when everything tells you to stay down. It's running into the fire, not because you know you'll be okay, but because someone else is in there." He clenched his fist, a flicker of green energy sparking around it. "At my school, UA High, our motto is Plus Ultra. It means go beyond. It means that when you hit your limit you push harder. When you're at 100%, you find a way to give 110%. It's probably illogical. It's probably reckless. But it's all I know." He looked at Superman, his eyes shining with an intensity that seemed to push back against the despair in the chamber. "You're not supposed to feel hopeful, Superman-san. You're supposed to be the reason someone else can feel hopeful. That's what a symbol is. And you do that by trying, by never giving up, even now. Even at the end of everything." Silence. Superman stared at the boy, at this child from another universe who had just articulated the absolute, fundamental truth of his own existence with a clarity that shook him to his core. He had spent his life trying to live up to the symbol on his chest. Izuku Midoriya had just explained that the symbol wasn't the goal. It was the act of trying itself. The struggle was the hope. A slow, genuine smile spread across Clark Kent's face for the first time since he'd arrived on the satellite. It was like watching the sun rise. Plus ultra, he repeated softly, testing the words. I like that. He reached out and placed a massive, gentle hand on Izuku's shoulder. The contact was warm, grounding. It wasn't a gesture of a superior to a subordinate. It was one of an equal. Of a comrade. The monitor didn't make a mistake, Superman said, his voice now clear and strong, the weariness replaced by a renewed, quiet fire. He wasn't looking for another strongman. He was looking for a compass. He squeezed Izuku's shoulder gently. Get some rest, kid. You've earned it. The war isn't over, and your army is going to need its heart. As Superman walked away, moving with a renewed sense of purpose to check on his cousin, Izuku watched him go. The crushing weight on his own shoulders hadn't vanished. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach. But for the first time, it felt manageable. He wasn't just a terrified kid anymore. He was the analyst. He was the empath. He was, as impossible as it sounded, the leader they needed. He looked down at his notebooks, the blueprint for their survival, and got back to work. The gathering was complete. Now, the real fight could begin. The conversation with Superman had been a turning point, a single, sturdy pillar erected in the collapsing cathedral of Izuku's confidence. It didn't banish the fear, but it gave him a foundation to stand upon. In the hours that followed, a subtle shift occurred on the monitor's satellite. The disparate, grieving heroes, drawn by a force they couldn't articulate, began to orbit the small, green-clad boy hunched over his notebooks. They didn't speak to him, not at first. They would simply watch as he paced, muttering a stream of incomprehensible data, his hands tracing patterns in the holographic air. They saw the flicker of green lightning that danced around him, a visible manifestation of a mind working at impossible speeds. He was no longer the terrified child who had arrived. He was a nexus of frantic, desperate energy. A generator trying to power a dead city. Hope, as he had told Superman, was a duty, and Izuku Midoriya was working a triple shift. The fragile quiet was shattered when the monitor appeared in the center of the room, his form coalescing from motes of cosmic light. Harbinger was at his side, looking even more frayed, as if she were a recording that had been played too many times. Your momentary victory has bought us nothing. The monitor's voice boomed, devoid of any preamble. He was a being of pure information, and the information was dire. The anti-monitor is aware of your interference. He is accelerating his primary objective. A new image dominated the central space, eclipsing the swirling galaxies. It was not a planet, but a maelstrom of raw, primordial chaos. Colors that had no names swirled into impossible shapes. It was a vision of creation itself. This is the dawn of time, the monitor explained, his voice taking on a grim reverence. The moment of creation for all positive matter universes. The anti-monitor intends to travel there. If he succeeds, he will not just erase our realities. He will rewrite the genesis of all things, ensuring that only his antimatter universe is ever born. He will poison the wellspring of existence. A cold dread, deeper than anything they had yet felt, settled over the assembled heroes. This was no longer a war of attrition, it was a battle for the very concept of reality. How does he intend to breach the dawn of time? Batman's voice was a low growl, cutting straight to the tactical heart of the matter. He had already absorbed the existential threat and moved on to logistics. The monitor changed the image. Now they saw a weapon of such obscene scale it defied comprehension. It was a cannon, miles long, forged from black, pockmarked metal that seemed to drink the light. It was housed within a fortress of jagged spires, floating in the stark, starless void of the antimatter universe. His vessel is also his weapon, the monitor stated. An antimatter cannon. It will fire a concentrated bolt of primordial antimatter, powerful enough to shatter the temporal walls protecting the dawn of time. Once the breach is made, he will merge with the blast, ride it into the heart of creation, and become a new, singular god. The plan was as absolute as it was horrifying. There was no recovery from such a move. No new earth to be born from the ashes. There would only be nothingness forever. While the other heroes stared, Paralyzed by the sheer, godlike scale of the threat, Izuku's mind was already in motion. The fear was a physical thing, a cold pressure on his chest, but his brain had already insulated itself, treating the apocalypse as the ultimate tactical problem. 2 objectives, his mind raced, his muttering beginning anew. Primary, stop the cannon from firing. Secondary, engage and defeat the anti-monitor himself. The objectives are linked but must be approached separately. A frontal assault on both is impossible, he's too powerful, his fortress too well defended. We need to split his focus. Divide our forces. A diversionary tactic combined with a surgical strike. He looked around the chamber, his eyes no longer seeing gods and legends but assets. Tactical pieces on a cosmic chessboard. I need a room, he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. Everyone turned to look at him. He stood up, his notebooks clutched to his chest like a shield. A place to work. A strategy room, with all the data you have. On his fortress, on the cannon's energy signature, everything. The monitor stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. It is done! A section of the satellite's wall became translucent, revealing a smaller, circular chamber that had not been there a moment before. Inside, holographic displays flickered to life, showing tactical readouts, energy schematics, and multiverse trajectory charts that made Izuku's head spin with possibilities. He didn't hesitate. He walked into the room, and it was like a master craftsman entering his workshop. He slapped his notebooks down on a central console, the paper sound a strange, organic contrast to the hum of alien technology. Cyborg-san, he called out, his voice sharp with purpose. Your systems, can you interface with this? I need you to filter the data streams. Give me everything you have on antimatter energy propagation and temporal mechanics. Victor Stone, who had been brooding over his own mechanical nature, looked up in surprise. He was being given a task, a purpose beyond simply being a weapon. A flicker of his old self, the brilliant scientist, returned to his single human eye. Yeah, I think I can, he said, striding into the room, his metallic limbs clicking with renewed determination. For the next several hours, the chamber became Izuku's world. He was a blur of motion and thought, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of desperate variables. He and Cyborg worked in tandem, Victor pulling raw, incomprehensible data from the monitor systems while Izuku translated it, processed it, and hammered it into a coherent strategy. His pen flew across the pages, the scratching sound a frantic counterpoint to the electronic hum. He designed strike teams, matching power sets and personalities with ruthless efficiency. He charted approach vectors, calculated potential enemy responses, and formulated dozens of contingency plans. The heroes outside watched through the translucent wall, mesmerized and slightly unnervous. They were watching a mind work in a way few had ever witnessed. It was a beautiful and terrifying thing to behold, but one person was not watching from a distance. Batman had entered the room silently, a shadow detaching itself from the others. He didn't speak, he just stood in the corner, observing, his white lenses missing nothing. He watched Izuku diagram a plan to have the Green Lanterns create a synchronized shield to absorb the cannon's initial energy flare. He watched him plot a path for the flashes through the fortress's ventilation system. He watched him weigh the destructive potential of Power Girl against her known vulnerability to certain types of magic, a weakness the anti-monitor's shadow magic might exploit. And then, his gaze fell upon the current page in Izuku's open notebook. It was a fresh page, but the header, written in a shaky but determined hand, made the blood in his veins run cold. Plus ultra scenarios, acceptable losses, sacrificial plays. Below it was a list. Not a list of plans, but a list of names. His friends. His allies. And next to each name was a series of cold, hard calculations. The Flash, B. Allen in the event of a cannon misfire. High probability of creating a speed vortex to absorb the antimatter. Projected survival chance, 1%. Necessary to save the temporal timeline. Green Lantern, J. Stewart shielding the primary assault team from the cannon's energy backlash. Ring energy depletion versus antimatter corrosion. Projected survival chance, 14%. Dependent on willpower. Superman, Kal-El direct confrontation with the anti-monitor. can sustain multiple direct hits, but vulnerable to overwhelming antimatter energy. A prolonged fight will result in cellular decay. He is the tip of the spear. He must be Captain Atom, a living nuclear deterrent. If breached, his quantum energy could be used to destabilize the fortress's power core. Projected survival chance if this option is used, 0%. The last resort. It went on and on. A horrifying calculus of death. A spreadsheet of souls. Batman had seen files like this before. They were the work of Amanda Waller, of Lex Luthor, of military generals who saw soldiers as nothing more than statistics. To see it now, scrawled in the earnest handwriting of a teenage boy who spoke of hope, was a profound violation. What is this? Batman's voice was a low, dangerous rumble that cut through Izuku's concentration like a shard of glass. Izuku jumped, spinning around. He hadn't even noticed Batman was there. Batman-san! I was working on the assault phasing. Batman took a slow, deliberate step forward, his shadow engulfing the console. He pointed a single, armored finger at the notebook. At the list. This? Batman repeated, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was colder than the void outside. You're running casualty projections. You're assigning acceptable loss values to my people. Izuku's face went pale. No! It's not like that. It's a contingency plan. For the worst-case scenarios. I have to be prepared for everything. You are playing with their lives. Batman snarled, stepping closer. The intimidation radiating from him was a physical force, pressing down on Izuku, making it hard to breathe. You're sitting here in your safe room, deciding who lives and who dies. You look at Barry Allen, and you see a 1% chance of survival. You look at Captain Atom, and you see a bomb. You've taken the best of us, and reduced them to numbers on a page. He loomed over Izuku now, the pointed ears of his cowl like the horns of a demon. I told the Monitor you would get people killed. I was wrong. You're not going to get them killed. You're planning on it. You're sanctioning it. Tell me, boy. His voice was laced with venomous contempt. Who gave you the right to play God? The accusation struck home with the force of a physical blow. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes, hot and immediate. The sheer weight of what he had been forcing himself to do, the horror he had been bottling up behind a wall of pure analysis, suddenly came crashing down. He slammed his fist on the console, his voice a choked, ragged sob. Don't you think I know that? He screamed, the outburst so sudden and raw that even Batman was taken aback. The tears were flowing freely now, carving clean tracks through the grime on his face. Every name I write down feels like a knife in my gut. I see their faces. I hear their voices. I imagine them dying, over and over, in 100 different ways, and it's tearing me apart. He swiped at his eyes with a gloved hand, leaving a black smear. But someone has to do it, he yelled, his voice cracking with anguish. Someone has to look at the whole, horrifying picture. That thing out there isn't going to play fair. It's a monster that eats universes for breakfast. If we go in there with nothing but hope and brave speeches, we're all going to die. Our hope won't matter. Our bravery won't matter. Nothing will matter. He jabbed a trembling finger at his own notebook, at the horrifying list. This isn't me playing God. This is me trying to cheat the devil. I'm looking for the path, any path, that leads to a universe that still exists tomorrow. And yes, that path is horrible, and it might cost us everything. But the cost of doing nothing, the cost of not making these calculations, is infinity. He finally sagged against the console, his energy spent, his body racked with shuddering breaths. He was just a kid, after all. A kid forced to carry a burden that would have crushed a god. I hate this, he whispered, his voice broken. I hate every second of it. I became a hero to save people, not to choose between them. He looked up at Batman, his green eyes, red-rimmed and filled with a desperate plea, meeting the cold white lenses of the cowl. I can't find a path where everyone comes home, Izuku admitted, the confession costing him dearly. The numbers, they won't allow it. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm missing something. He took a step towards the dark night, an act of incredible bravery. So help me, he pleaded. Don't just stand there and tell me I'm wrong. Help me be right. You've always found a way. Everyone says it. You're the strategist. The detective. Your mind is your greatest weapon. So help me. Look at my plan. Find the flaws. Find the other option I can't see. Help me change the math. Help me save them. It was the last thing Batman expected. Not a defense. Not an excuse. It was a plea for help. A raw, honest admission of his own limits, and a sign of profound respect for Batman's abilities. Izuku wasn't trying to usurp him or emulate him. He was trying to recruit him. Batman stood in silence for a long, tense minute. The entire satellite seemed to hold its breath. He looked from the boy's tear-streaked, determined face to the horrifying calculations in the notebook. He saw the truth. The boy wasn't a monster. He wasn't cold. He was burning with a self-destructive empathy, forcing himself to walk through hell because he believed it was the only way to lead others out of it. He was carrying a burden Batman knew all too well. In that moment, Batman didn't see a liability. He saw a mirror. A brighter, more hopeful, but just as tormented reflection of himself. He saw a soldier. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and placed a heavy, armored hand on Izuku's shoulder. The boy flinched, but didn't pull away. "Get back to work!" Batman growled. The words were harsh, but the tone had shifted. The venom was gone, replaced by a grim, resonant purpose. He stepped up to the console, standing beside Izuku. He pointed to the plan for the Green Lanterns. "Your shield configuration is inefficient. The resonant frequency of their constructs will create a harmonic dissonance under antimatter pressure. They need to create a layered, non-Euclidean barrier. It will increase their energy drain by 20%, but it will raise their survival chance to over 40%. He then pointed to the Flash's infiltration route. "A ventilation system is the first place a competent tactician would set a trap. They need an alternate route. The energy conduits, their natural bioelectric auras, amplified by the speed force, should allow them to phase through the conduits without tripping internal sensors. It's riskier, but the element of surprise is worth it." Izuku stared, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten as he absorbed the information. He grabbed his pen and began making corrections, his handwriting now a frantic mix of his own style and Batman's brutally efficient suggestions. A tense, unspoken alliance was forged in that moment, in the silent, humming war room at the end of everything. It was a fusion of two of the multiverse's sharpest minds. Deku's boundless, hopeful innovation, his uncanny ability to see heroic potential and synergy, was now tempered and honed by Batman's grim, pragmatic ruthlessness. Izuku would design the heroic, impossible charge. Batman would map out every pitfall and landmine along the way. Izuku planned for victory. Batman planned for survival. Together, they refined the plan. They worked for hours, a silent, perfectly synchronized team. The final strategy was a terrifying, beautiful, and desperate thing. It was a multi-pronged assault designed to be a no-win scenario for the Anti-Monitor. Phase 1: The Ghost. The Flashes, both Barry and Jay, would phase through the fortress's power systems to sabotage the cannon's primary firing mechanism. A high-risk, high-reward surgical strike. Phase 2: The Shield. Superman, Power Girl, and the Green Lanterns would lead a direct frontal assault on the fortress, a massive, brilliant diversion designed to draw the Anti-Monitor's personal attention and the bulk of his Shadow Demon army. They were the Anvil. Phase 3: The Hammer. Wonder Woman and a team of heavy hitters would use the chaos of the diversion to breach the fortress at a weak point identified by Batman, their goal to fight their way to the cannon's secondary controls and destroy it from the inside. And Izuku? His role was to remain on the satellite, a single, central nexus of command. The quarterback. The one who would see the whole field, who would adjust the plan in real time, who would make the terrible, split-second decisions that would mean the difference between oblivion and a future. When they finally emerged from the war room, the suns of a dozen galaxies having drifted across the star ceiling, the assembled heroes looked at them. They saw not a boy and his intimidating shadow, but a unified command. Izuku stood before them, his face pale and drawn, but his eyes burning with a fierce, unwavering light. He no longer looked like a scared child. He looked like a leader who had stared into the abyss and had not flinched. He looked like a hero. "We have a plan," he said, his voice clear and steady, ringing with an authority no one dared to question. "It's not going to be easy. And it's not going to be clean. But it's our chance." The air on the monitor's satellite was thick with a tension that felt like a coiled spring. The plan, a tapestry woven from Izuku's desperate innovation and Batman's grim pragmatism, was complete. The heroes, once a fractured collection of survivors, now stood as a unified army, their individual griefs and fears momentarily supplanted by a singular, sharp-edged purpose. They were assembled before the central console, a pantheon of gods and mortals ready to march on Hell's fortress. Izuku stood before them, not on a platform, but on the same level as everyone else. He was no longer the trembling boy who had arrived here. The fear was still a cold stone in his gut, but he had encased it in layers of pure, unadulterated resolve. His eyes, clear and unnervingly focused, scanned the faces of the heroes he was about to send into the maw of the lion. "The teams are set." His voice was steady, carrying across the silent chamber with an authority that belied his age. It was the voice of command, earned in the fires of Earth 38 and forged in the long, dark hours in the war room. "Phase 1, Ghost Team. Flash J. You're on a 12-minute clock from insertion. Your only objective is the primary firing capacitor of the antimatter cannon. Sabotage, not destruction. In and out. We need them to believe the weapon is still viable, just delayed. Avoid all contact." Barry Allen and Jay Garrick shared a look, a silent understanding passing between the two generations of speed. They nodded once, a crisp, unified gesture. "Phase 2, Shield Team." Izuku's gaze fell upon Superman, Power Girl, and the assembled Green Lanterns. "You are the focal point. You will be loud, you will be bright, and you will be overwhelming. Your objective is not victory, it is presence. Draw the Anti-Monitor's personal attention. Draw the full might of his army. You are the wall against which he will break his forces." Superman's jaw was set like granite. He looked at Izuku, his eyes no longer holding a trace of doubt, only a profound, heavy trust. "We'll give them a fight they won't forget." Phase 3, Hammer Team. Izuku turned to Wonder Woman, who stood at the head of a formidable group of warriors, including Captain Atom and the Atlantean King, Aquaman. "While Shield Team has their attention, you will breach the fortress at the designated weak point. You will fight your way to the cannon's core. Your objective is total destruction. Bring it down." Diana drew her sword, the blade ringing with a pure, divine note. "It will be done." A heavy silence fell as the weight of the mission settled upon them. This was it. The single, desperate gambit upon which all of existence rested. Before the final command could be given, Supergirl floated over to her cousin, a small, hopeful smile on her face that seemed impossibly bright in the grim atmosphere. "Hey, Cal," she said softly. "Just like old times, huh? Fighting impossible odds?" Superman returned the smile, though his was tinged with a deep sadness. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of blonde hair from her face. "Not impossible, Kara. Never impossible, when we're together." He looked at her, at this vibrant, brilliant young woman who was the last living piece of the Krypton they both remembered, the last person in the infinite universes who knew what it felt like to see a red sun in the sky. "Be safe. You too, big cousin," she replied, her smile unwavering. "No matter what happens, we face it together." Izuku watched them, a pang of longing for his own friends, for his own world, striking him with a physical force. He pushed it down. There was no room for that now. He was a commander. His soldiers were waiting. He looked to Batman, who stood beside him at the console, a silent shadow of confirmation. Batman gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. That was the only signal Izuku needed. He took a deep breath. "Monitor. Send them in." The world dissolved into columns of silver light. The antimatter universe was not the empty black of space. It was a void. A complete and utter absence of everything. There were no stars, no nebulae, no distant galaxies. There was only a silence so profound it felt like a pressure against the eardrums, and a cold that didn't just leach heat, but seemed to leach existence itself. Floating in this oppressive nothingness was the Anti-Monitor's fortress. It wasn't built so much as it was congealed, a cancerous growth on reality's edge. Jagged, obsidian spires clawed at the emptiness, and at its heart was the cannon, a weapon so vast it blocked out a significant portion of the non-sky. The ghost team arrived first, 2 silent flickers of red and yellow lightning phasing into existence deep within the fortress's substructure. They were gone before reality could even register their presence. Seconds later, hell was unleashed upon the fortress's exterior. Phase 2 arrived with the force of a nova. Superman was a comet of hope, a red and blue streak that slammed into the fortress wall with a sound that should have shattered a continent. Power Girl was right behind him, her every blow a concussive blast of raw Kryptonian might. The Green Lanterns, John Stewart at their head, did not attack. They followed Batman's revised plan, their rings projecting a massive, multi-layered shield of non-Euclidean geometry, its impossible angles designed to deflect and disperse the antimatter blasts that immediately began to spew from the fortress's automated defenses. The diversion had begun. And it was glorious. Back on the satellite, Izuku was a nexus of controlled chaos. He stood before a dozen holographic displays, his eyes darting from one data stream to the next. Biometric readouts for every hero glowed a healthy green. Tactical overlays showed the shadow demon hordes swarming towards S.H.I.E.L.D. Team, just as predicted. A live feed from Cyborg, who had hacked into the fortress's comm systems, crackled with the sounds of battle. "Status, Ghost Team," Izuku said into his comm, his voice calm and level. "We're in." Barry's voice came back, a rapid-fire staccato. "Navigating the conduits." Batman was right, this place is a maze, but we're making good time. "No alarms yet, copy that." "Stick to the timetable," Izuku ordered. He turned his attention to another screen. "Hammer Team, the diversion is working. Their flank defenses are at 40%. Your insertion window is open, go." He watched as another team materialized amidst the chaos, slipping through the S.H.I.E.L.D. team's defenses and blasting their way into a secondary hangar bay, their attack catching the fortress completely by surprise. For the first few minutes, the plan was flawless. It was a beautiful, deadly piece of clockwork, and every gear was turning perfectly. Izuku allowed himself a fraction of a second of relief. Maybe, just maybe, his calculations had been right. "Something's wrong." Batman's gravelly voice cut through his thoughts. The Dark Knight stood beside him, his gaze fixed on a single, ominous energy reading at the heart of the fortress. "What is it?" Izuku asked, his stomach clenching. "All teams are green. Shadow Demon response is within projected parameters. Look!" Batman pointed. "His energy signature. The anti-monitor. It's not fluctuating. It's a flat line." Izuku zoomed in on the reading, his blood running cold. Batman was right. The signature was immense, a towering mountain of power, but it was perfectly stable. A being under attack, a commander whose fortress was being assaulted on 2 fronts, should show some variation. But this was the calm, steady reading of an observer, of a predator watching its prey walk into a trap. "He's not fighting back," Izuku whispered in horror. "He's toying with them." On the battlefield, Superman was beginning to feel it too. Every punch he threw, a blow that could shatter moons, was absorbed by the fortress's hull with a dull thud. The swarms of shadow demons were endless, a tide of darkness that crashed against their Green Lantern's shield, their sheer numbers a tactic of attrition designed to wear them down, to drain their energy and their will. Then, the fortress fell silent. The defensive turrets powered down. The shadow demons retreated, melting back into the obsidian walls. An eerie, expectant quiet descended. From the very heart of the fortress, a section of the wall peeled back, revealing a throne room of impossible size. And on the throne sat the anti-monitor. He was larger than they had anticipated, a monument to entropy clad in intricate, blue and silver armor that seemed to be forged from the remnants of dead universes. His face was scarred and ancient, and his eyes glowed with the light of dying stars. He rose from his throne, not with a burst of speed, but with the slow, inexorable dread of a rising tide. "The heroes of the multiverse." His voice was not sound, but a schism in the fabric of reality, a grating vibration that resonated directly in their bones. "You have come so far, only to die." Power Girl, never one for speeches, let out a furious roar and charged. For Krypton, she was one of the most powerful beings in existence. She struck the Anti-Monitor with the force of an exploding sun. And he didn't even flinch. He simply raised a hand and caught her fist. A sickening crunch echoed in the void. He squeezed, and Power Girl screamed, her bones, once thought indestructible, shattering under his grip. He tossed her aside like a broken doll, where she crashed into the lantern's shield, her arm bent at an unnatural angle. The heroes stared in stunned disbelief. The plan had just shattered into a million pieces. Hope! The Anti-Monitor's voice droned, filled with a cosmic, intellectual contempt. A flaw in the cosmic code. A statistical anomaly that allows lesser beings to struggle against the inevitable. I am here to correct that flaw. Superman let out a roar of pure rage and flew at him, a blur of motion. The real fight had begun. It was a battle of gods. The void itself trembled as they exchanged blows, each impact sending shockwaves across the non-space around them. But it was a horribly one-sided affair. For every blow Superman landed, staggering the god being for a moment, the Anti-Monitor returned a blow that sent the Man of Steel reeling, his invulnerable skin splitting, his blue suit tearing. Wonder Woman and her team, hearing the battle from deep within the fortress, knew the diversion had collapsed. "We have to move faster," she commanded, cleaving through a squad of elite shadow demons guarding the cannon's core. On the satellite, Izuku's command center had become a chamber of horrors. Every screen was flashing red. Power Girl's biometric line was a chaotic scribble of pain and trauma. The lantern's shield was buckling, their ring energy plummeting at a catastrophic rate. And Superman. Izuku watched in abject terror as Kal-El's solar energy reserves, the very source of his power, began to drain away, consumed by the Anti-Monitor's corrupting antimatter aura. "Shield team, fall back! Retreat!" Izuku screamed into the comms, his voice cracking with panic. "Hammer team, abort your mission! Ghost team, get out of there! Everyone, pull back now!" But his orders were lost in the storm. The Anti-Monitor was a gravity well of destruction, pulling them all into a death spiral. He caught Superman by the cape, slamming him down onto the surface of the fortress with enough force to crater the supposedly indestructible metal. He placed a massive foot on Superman's chest, pinning the broken hero. "You are the foremost champion of this flawed creation," the Anti-Monitor said, looking down at the bleeding Man of Steel. "Your existence is a testament to the lie of hope. I will extinguish you, and with you, this universe's final, foolish light." He began to gather energy in his hand, a swirling vortex of pure, crackling antimatter. It was a kill shot. A blast that would unmake a soul. On the satellite, Izuku could only watch, his hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. Tears streamed down his face. "I missed it," his mind screamed. The energy readings, his stability, it was a trap. I walked them right into a trap. I sent him there to die. Batman was right. He was right. He was helpless. A commander, continents away from the battle, forced to watch his lead soldier be executed. Superman looked up, his vision blurry, his body screaming in agony. He saw the antimatter blast coalescing, and in a moment of grim acceptance, he closed his eyes. He had failed. No! The scream was one of pure, defiant love. A streak of red and gold shot across the battlefield. Supergirl. She had seen her cousin fall, had seen the killing blow being prepared. And in that instant, she made a choice. She had already lost one world. She had already lost one family. She would not lose another. She flew directly into the path of the beam. It struck her full in the chest. Her scream was not one of pain, but of pure, unadulterated energy being unleashed. The antimatter, instead of annihilating her, was momentarily absorbed, overloading her Kryptonian cells with a catastrophic, suicidal amount of power. Her body erupted in a corona of golden light, her eyes burning like twin suns. She was no longer just a hero, she was a supernova of defiance. "Get away from him!" she shrieked, her voice a cosmic roar. She slammed into the Anti-Monitor with a force that dwarfed anything that had come before. This wasn't a punch. It was a kamikaze attack. She was pouring every last ounce of her stored solar energy, every fiber of her being, her very life force, into a single, impossible strike. The Anti-Monitor, for the first time, looked shocked. The god being who had treated Superman like an insect was now facing the full, unrestrained, dying fury of a Kryptonian star. The impact was blinding. A wave of pure energy, both positive and negative, erupted from the point of contact, shattering a section of the Anti-Monitor's nigh invulnerable armor. A deep, spider-webbing crack appeared on his chest plate, leaking raw, unstable energy. The Anti-Monitor stumbled back, a guttural roar of genuine pain ripped from his throat. He had been wounded. The god had been made to bleed, but the cost was absolute. The light around Supergirl faded. The catastrophic energy had burned her out from the inside. She hung in the void for a moment, her body limp, her costume tattered and scorched. The brilliant, hopeful light in her eyes flickered and then went out. She fell, a broken angel, from the sky. A silence fell over the battlefield, more profound and terrible than the void itself. The heroes, the shadow demons, even the wounded Anti-Monitor, all stared at the small, falling form. Superman, freed from the god's grip, moved faster than he ever had before. He was not flying to save her. He was too late for that. He flew to catch her. He cradled his cousin's body in his arms, his movements impossibly gentle. He looked down at her face, so peaceful in death, and the universe held its breath. Then, a sound tore through the void. It was a sound of such pure, primal grief and rage that it shook the very foundations of the fortress. It was the sound of a good man's heart breaking. Superman threw his head back and screamed, a cry that carried the weight of 2 dead worlds, of a family lost twice over. The Anti-Monitor, clutching his wounded chest, snarled in fury. "The flaw persists. I will eradicate you all, Kal, no!" Wonder Woman's voice was a sharp command, cutting through his grief. "We can't fight him. Not now. We have to go. Her sacrifice can't be for nothing." She and the other heroes formed a defensive ring around Superman, who was still holding Kara's body, refusing to let her go. They fought with a desperate, renewed ferocity, no longer fighting for victory, but for the right to mourn their dead. They pushed back the swarming demons, creating a small, sacred space of defiance in the heart of their enemy's territory. "Lila, now! Get us out of here!" Batman's voice barked into the comms. A final, merciful column of silver light engulfed the remaining heroes of S.H.I.E.L.D. team. They vanished, taking their fallen comrade with them, leaving the enraged Anti-Monitor alone in his wounded fortress. They reappeared on the satellite in a cascade of shimmering light. The sight that greeted the others was one of utter defeat. Power Girl was being supported by 2 lanterns, her arm a mangled ruin. The other heroes were battered, bruised, and spiritually broken. And in the center of it all was Superman, kneeling on the floor, cradling Supergirl's lifeless body in his arms. He was not crying. His expression was a void. His eyes, which had always been so full of kindness and hope, were now 2 empty windows looking out onto a dead universe. The silence on the satellite was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of grief and failure. No one moved. No one spoke. Every hero was locked in their own private hell. The silence was an accusation. It was a judgment. And it was all directed at the boy standing before the now dark command console. Izuku Midoriya stood frozen, his body trembling uncontrollably. He stared at Kara's peaceful face, at the scorched hole in her costume, at the unseeing blue of her eyes. He saw the cost of his plan, the horrifying, unacceptable loss he had written down in his notebook, made real and undeniable. He replayed the battle in his mind, a frantic, high-speed autopsy of his own failure. The flatline energy reading. I should have seen it. It wasn't stability, it was confidence. His confidence. I misread the data. I assumed he would react like a military commander, not a god. I was arrogant. I was a fool. I made a plan to fight a soldier, and I sent them against the force of nature. His gaze drifted to Superman's broken form. He had sent that vibrant, hopeful young woman to her death. He had shattered the heart of the world's greatest hero. He had taken the symbol of hope and drowned it in despair. Batman's words from their first meeting came rushing back, a venomous, prophetic whisper in his mind. He will get people killed. He had. A choked sob escaped his lips. He stumbled back from the console, his hand flying to his mouth as if to stifle a scream. The eyes of the other heroes were on him. He could feel their silent, burning judgment. He couldn't breathe. The air was too thick with his failure. He turned and ran. He fled from the command center, from the sight of the fallen Kryptonian, from Superman's empty eyes, from the crushing weight of their collective grief. He didn't know where he was going. He just ran down the crystalline corridors of the satellite, his own ragged breaths and frantic footfalls the only sound. He finally found a dark, empty maintenance shaft, a place of wires and conduits, far from the main chamber. He collapsed into the corner, pulling his knees to his chest, making himself as small as possible. The confident commander was gone, stripped away by the harsh reality of war, leaving only the scared, broken child behind. He was Izuku Midoriya, the boy who wanted to save everyone. And he had just become a commander who had lost his first soldier. The weight of her name, Kara Zor-El, settled upon his soul, a burden he was sure he would never be able to lift. And in the cold, silent darkness he wept.